Welcome, everyone, to this program on preserving diversity pipeline programs. I'm Patricia Lee, moderator for the program. I'm the chair of the ABA Council on Diversity in the Educational Pipeline. I'm a retired legal services attorney, having practiced for 35 years. And in the last 20 years, I've been focusing on access to justice and diversity initiatives, with my latest focus working with the California Lawyers Foundation, supporting high school pipeline programs. The DEI Center and its entities want to thank our co-sponsors, the Section on Civil Rights and Social Justice, and the ABA Young Lawyers Division for their support. This series was developed to address concerns following the Students for Fair Admissions versus Harvard decision, which we refer to throughout this program as the Harvard decision. The planners hope to provide practical information to move the overall goal of diversity, equity, and inclusion in the legal profession forward. The next program will be held on December 5th to address the concerns of prospective undergraduate and law students as they navigate their way through the law school. Today, we're focusing on pipeline programs and the critical role that they play increasing access to higher education and law school for diverse students. However, these programs are also potential targets for those seeking to challenge the validity of programs centered on increasing educational opportunities for underrepresented students. This program will provide an opportunity to discuss this dichotomy in an effort to maintain the integrity and importance of pipeline programs into the future. At this point, I'd like to ask our speakers to briefly introduce themselves so that we'll have a sense of who's participating and what experiences they have. So we'll start with Cindy.
Good morning, and I'm very humbled to be on this panel with all these amazing people. My name is Cindy Lopez. I am the founder of Legal Education Access Pipeline, and I am a retired California Deputy Attorney General.
Thanks. And JC.
Hi, all. Thank you so much, ABA, for putting this incredible panel together. And it's just a wonderful event to have. I'm the president and CEO of the Council on Legal Education Opportunity. We're celebrating our 55th year this year. And I'm fortunate to serve in this capacity since last year. I'm an attorney here in New York and New Jersey. I am a former president and commissioner of the New York City Board of Elections. And I today teach at the City University of New York, where I teach law and history at the Department of Ethnic and Race Studies. Thank you.
Thanks, JC. Antoinette?
Good morning. I am Antoinette Smith. I'm the executive director for Just the Beginning, a pipeline organization, and we provide pipeline programming beginning in middle school through law school all over the country. Prior to working at JTB, I was at the American Bar Association for over 20 years and at a law firm here in Chicago, all working in the areas of diversity, equity, and inclusion.
Thank you. Oyango?
Good morning. Thank you for having this program and thank you for inviting me to participate. I am Oyango Snell. I am a strategist, speaker, and consultant on many facets of leadership, corporate governance, and many other components that impact nonprofit organizations as well as trade associations. I am the former CEO and executive director of the California Lawyers Association, as well as the California Lawyers Foundation, where I began my work in the pipeline space as it relates to diversifying the legal profession. I look forward to our conversation today.
Thanks, Oyango. And Tom?
Thank you, Pat. Hello, everyone. My name is Thomas Saenz. I am the president and general counsel of MALDEF, the Mexican American Legal Defense and Educational Fund. I am also a member of the ABA's Coalition on Racial and Ethnic Justice. I have been the president and general counsel of MALDEF for 14 years, but I've spent 26 years of my career at MALDEF. MALDEF's mission is to promote the civil rights of all Latinos living in the United States.
Thanks, Tom. Thanks to everyone for joining us. We're looking forward to your comments. Before we move on to our discussion about pipeline programs, we want to be sure we're all on the same page with an understanding of the decision in the Harvard case. So, Tom, at this time, since many of us are not constitutional law experts, please elaborate on the content and scope of this decision and how it impacts admission programs and student applicants.
Sure. So what the Supreme Court majority decided this past June in the Harvard cases, one case was against Harvard, the other against the University of North Carolina, was basically a rejection of a 45-year-old precedent in Bakke versus University of California Regents in 1978, when the court concluded in the first decision on affirmative action considered by the court, it concluded in 1978 that limited, narrow consideration of race was permitted in making admissions decisions to selective universities in service of only one compelling interest, namely a government interest in diversity in the classroom. Effectively, what the court did in the Harvard cases this past June was to reject diversity any longer as a compelling government interest to support the limited and narrow consideration of race in admissions decisions. It did so, the majority did so by concluding that both Harvard's articulation of diversity as a compelling government interest and UNC's articulation were inadequate. And in reading their conclusions, it's difficult to see how any institution could articulate diversity in a way that would be acceptable to the court. So while they didn't say it directly, effectively they overruled the 45-year-old precedent in Bakke and eliminated systematic consideration of race in making admissions decisions at selective universities across the country. Important to note that because they were considering both a private university and a public university, their decision covers both equal protection law, the Constitution in the 14th Amendment as it applies to public institutions, but also Title VI of the Civil Rights Act of 1964 as it applies to those private institutions that are recipients of federal funds. Now, in fact, that means virtually every university in the country is affected potentially by this decision. Important to note that the court did not change the law with respect to affirmative action or consideration of race in any other area, including employment, including contracting, etc. That's important to note that because the court had over many decades already devised different tests for consideration of race in each of those contexts. The Harvard decisions only relate to the law as determined in the higher education context. And equally important to note, the Supreme Court majority, through the opinion author, Chief Justice Roberts, made clear that this is not an indication that admissions must be race blind. It is not an invitation or a directive to be ignorant of race. In fact, what Chief Justice Roberts said is that universities can, and indeed should, consider individual applicants' experiences of race and racial discrimination as expressed through essays and other materials considered in the admissions process, that institutions can and should consider those individual applicants' experiences of race and racial discrimination, especially as they shaped them as applicants for admission to the university. So very important to say this is not a race blindness mandate or invitation, but it does eliminate, after 45 years, the systemic consideration of race in making admissions decisions at selective higher education institutions.
Okay, thanks, Tom. Let's look at a little bit more background on this case before we move on to our pipeline discussions. In case people aren't aware, these cases were led by anti-affirmative action activist Edward Bloom, who has pursued a 14-year legal campaign to challenge affirmative action in college and university admissions. He has stated that it is his mission to create a colorblind society. He also states that the elimination of affirmative action will not reduce diversity in colleges and universities. And when asked why he says this, he states that our experts show that if Harvard abandoned legacy preferences, if they abandoned preferences for the children of faculty and staff, if they gave less of a preference to certain athletic teams, stopped giving preferences to kids on the dean's list, and lowered the bar a little bit for kids from a lower socioeconomic strata than the typical Harvard kid comes from, do all of that and you can maintain racial and ethnic diversity without classifying students by race and then treating them differently by race. That's what I'd like to ask the panelists what you think about Bloom's strategies, responses, and so forth. And we'll start with Antoinette.
Thank you. with regards to the strategy and the agenda about a colorblind society, I guess I just don't understand that. Or I don't understand what people hope to achieve when they say that. Because when I think of people saying a colorblind society, I think about exclusion and removing pieces of who you are when you don't see someone's color or their differences, and wanting everyone to be a certain thing in conformity, and not being able to be what you are. And the other part, I just have a problem understanding his agenda in general. I understand it, but
Yeah, we kind of get it.
we
but
all understand it.
It doesn't make sense.
It doesn't make sense.
Yeah.
Thank you, Pat.
How about you, JC? You're on mute.
Thank you, Pat, and thank you, Tom, for explaining the case and so thoroughly. I felt like I was back at Fordham Law School, day one. Much appreciated. You know, one of the interesting parts of his quote here as to his agenda is there is a way to go about doing this without putting a thumb on a scale. I'd like to ask him, what way, when you've had 2 feet on that scale and a book bag that's about 2 tons heavy on one side, what way can we possibly dismantle the evils of racism and systemic racism in our society? I would like to know, what way is he thinking? I think it was a misguided decision. And I also think that, you know, there's something nefarious about the methods and strategies of the cohort that is coming after programs like ours and programs that are dealing with diversity across the country, fellowships and the like. And it's important that we continue to remind ourselves that, you know, like Antoinette mentioned, this idea of a colorblind society is an aspiration, but it's not a reality. So the Blum tactic is very concerning because in his premise is this idea that giving an opportunity is a thumb on the scale, but completely disregarding 500 years of folks putting all of their feet and all of their weight on the scale to the other side. Thank you.
Thanks, JC. Oyango?
Yeah, I pick right up where JC left off. If the desire is to create a colorblind society, then you can't just go back 45 years. You have to go back at the latest to 1776 as the foundation of our republic, where people of color or people of dark skin, where race was a matter, were 3/5 of a man. If you don't want to start there and you want to go back further, you can go back to 1619 during the indentured servitude and individuals who fled from African continents and who was brought to America from African continents as part of slavery. But if that's too much for you, you can go to the post-Civil War era, where people of color were fighting to be recognized for their rights, to fight for this, to fight for this country. But if that doesn't make you feel comfortable, you can bring it to the 1960s or the 50s, where people of color have had to fight the battles for civil rights, to be able to vote, to be able to be educated, to be able to drink from the same water fountain, where race shouldn't have mattered. But I think the signs said whites only here, so they were going by race, and blacks and people of color over there. So it's funny how when advocates and individuals continue to fight for equity for people of color and people who have been disenfranchised in this nation for hundreds of years, are now trying to equalize and deconstruct the systemic institutions that have plagued our society over and over. It's interesting that it becomes more about, well, it shouldn't be about race anymore. It should be about a colorblind society where we don't see any difference in any individual. It strips away, as Antoinette said, the individual uniqueness and the value that we bring to whatever it is that we're doing, whether it's in the educational context or the employment context. If you strip away our identity as far as race is concerned, whether you're white, black, Latino, or other, you strip away all of the individuality rather, as well as our intersectionalities that come to the table that makes us who we are as individuals and how we advance institutions. So I find it, you know, Antoinette said it's confusing and I don't understand it, but then again, we understand it. I find it more or less hypocritical to say we should have a colorblind society, but yet we should also ignore why we don't have a colorblind society, so to speak. If you give benefit of the doubt that what he's trying to say is we should be judging people based off the creed of the content of their creed and who they are as individuals, not necessarily just because of one factor or another. But I would be too lenient and too diplomatic if I was to give that benefit of the doubt, so I won't.
Okay. And Cindy?
Just kind of piggybacking on Antoinette and Oyango, a colorblind society, really, it's, again, is that even a goal? Is that reality? No. When I think about people like Mr. Bloom who are so anti-affirmative action, I am trying not to be cynical and skeptical about his motives. I think it's kind of, he makes it sound like there are all these brown and black students at colleges and law schools. Let's be honest, although affirmative action has helped, there's still an issue about lack of diversity in colleges, lack of diversity in law schools, in grad schools. So I'm kind of, again, piggybacking on what the others have said, I don't understand his motives. I also think it's very interesting that he mentions legacy, right? About people who their father has named a building at USC, so of course they're going to get in. I don't see him bringing any legacy lawsuits. So that to me is almost the most hypocritical thing about his agenda.
Okay, and Tom, anything to add or summarize?
Yeah, certainly. I think that it's certainly unusual. You said, Pat, he's had 14 years to come up with this answer, at least, and he still can't hide how disingenuous his answer is. And it starts with the fact that his goal is not about trying to achieve something in colorblind in higher education. His goal is about trying to convince everyone in American society that huge gaping disparities faced by certain communities are somehow okay and acceptable. And that's basically contrary to the very principles of the civil rights movement in the 1960s, because we embedded in our law the notion that dramatic racial disparities are a pathology and that we need to take steps in the law to address them and eliminate them. He wants to change that, and he wants us all to shrug when we hear that Black and brown students are woefully underrepresented in the Harvards and UNCs of the country. But the basic problem is he focuses only on preferences. So it makes it a lie. Eliminating those preferences, as important as it is, I think legacy preferences should go away. I think donor preferences should go away. I think faculty preferences should go away. But that's really dealing with the edges of the admissions process. The reason that will not achieve what he says it will achieve, the reason it's a lie, is he's not dealing with the inherent inequities in our current quote unquote merit admissions system. The fact is that so many of the criteria that are used at Harvard, UNC, and universities across the country are embedded with inequity. And I'm not only talking about standardized tests that have been exposed over the last decades as having enduring problems with their discriminatory effects on certain groups and have very limited connection to success in universities. I'm talking about all of their criteria. Some of them, like standardized tests, actually had their origins decades ago in what were more or less overt racist aims. But even those that didn't have their birth in overtly racist aims still have embedded discriminatory effects. Give an example. We've learned through the great efforts of the Black Lives Matter movement that lots of folks, including cops in that circumstance, have embedded in their brains racial stereotypes, negative stereotypes that play out in subconscious bias. That is also true of educators. We love educators, but they were raised in this country, then they have those embedded subconscious biases. So to suggest that somehow teacher recommendations, counselor recommendations, principal recommendations that are used in our admissions process are somehow reflective of merits not affected by those subconscious biases is simply naive. So the problem with his quote, it's a great quote that you gave us, is he is dealing with the edges of the admissions process rather than recognizing that we have real problems with our merit criteria continuing today in their embedded inequities.
Thanks, you all. And as we noted, that his response is really disregard over 40 years of prior precedent, as well as societal realities of race, discrimination, and inequity. There's one other point I want to raise here, and it's something kind of more personal than me than maybe those of you on the panel. It's a admission by Mr. Bloom that he made a deliberate shift in the strategy in this case. The argument no longer centers on how affirmative action impacts white people. He acknowledges that he needed Asian American plaintiffs to sue the universities, allowing him to spin a narrative that affirmative action is pitting students of color against one another. We know that this is a false narrative, and there's a study that actually analyzes the applications of Asian American and white students, close to 700,000 applications by Asians and white students to a subset of selective U.S. institutions over 5 application cycles between 2015 and 2016. And the study found that affirmative action was not responsible for the lower rate of admission of Asian American students. It showed that for Asian Americans to at least one of the schools, the admission rate was 28% lower than whites. And for the South Asian students, the rate was at least 49% lower in terms of admissions. And by the way, and with that particular finding, I wanted to remind everybody that with the Asian community, you need to really disaggregate the Asian community. There's so many different groups within that community that it's hard to compare apples to apples in terms of how negative the impact is on Asians. But based on the study, they found that many of the schools were giving preference to legacy applicants. Legacy applicants are really critical in this respect. They also found that the schools were less likely to admit Asian students from geographic regions with relatively high shares of applications from Asians. So if there are multiple applications in California to specific schools, they reduced those to make space for other applications from around the nation, Asian and white. So Bloom's use of Asian plaintiffs has been a divisive wedge among Asian groups, as well as between Asians and other communities of color. For us as DEI advocates, how do we respond to that, and how do we discuss this within our DEI community so that everyone understands that this is a false narrative and that this is Bloom's extension of his long strategy to wipe out race-conscious and affirmative action initiatives? We start with Antoinette. We'll start with you again.
Thank you, Pat. I think with what you just said, education and facts, it's definitely a false narrative in this situation, but it's not a practice that we aren't familiar with. In other instances, the division within a marginalized group, but I just think combating it with facts.
Okay. Oyango?
Yeah, and I'm so glad you have Tom on, because I don't contend to be a constitutional expert or an expert on affirmative action programming and its genesis and progeny. What I am skilled at is analyzing data and turning that data into mission-driven strategies to move toward effective change. And when I think about that, I look back to, we want to time this about 45 years ago when the ABA first started collecting data and began pushing programs on diversity and inclusion, working with the legal community, but then tracking data as it related to demographics of the profession. And at that particular point in time in the early 80s, the profession was about a majority of about 87, 88%, maybe close to 90% Caucasian. That left about 10 or 12% people of color. Well, as of late, as the recent data shows us from the ABA and its demographics survey, it's about 14% people of color. So over 40 plus years, the demographics have not changed almost one bit, about 3 or 4 percentage points from the early 80s to now. And that's with affirmative action and pipeline programming. Right? So think about that. That's with affirmative action and pipeline programming. So that when in it of itself strikes a chord in opposite to the strategy as well as some of the conclusions that the advocates who have pushed these types of cases have made. But thinking about the strategy that they've taken, this divide and conquer strategy, so to speak, by taking various people of color and putting them into what we call the minority class and trying to represent one of them against the whole arc of these types of equity-based programs. I think I would agree with Antoinette that as DEI advocates, we must not only bring facts to the table, but we also must continue to be mission driven. Keep the main thing the main thing. Our work is about helping to prepare, particularly people of color and people from low economic socio backgrounds, regardless of their racial identity, in order to enter the legal profession and serve the communities that they represent. And in helping to prepare those individuals, it is not directly race-based. So on one hand, it's about understanding what's happening in the broader demographic or in the broader sense, rather, of what's happening at the Supreme Court level and throughout the laws of our land. But also it's about keeping your main thing the main thing. And that's preparing young people for the future and the future that they're going to have to inherit with the difficulties and things that they will be facing as they grow into the profession. So from my perspective, it's not only about having that factual kind of background to understand how things are playing out, but to also, as advocates, to be vigilant and to be focused on what your main thing is, what your North Star is, what your goal and what your passion is as far as preparing the next generation to be successful.
Okay, thanks. Cindy?
So it seems like pitting Asian Americans against other underrepresented groups has been going on for years and years. And as Antoinette and Oyango just said, really the best way is to combat with facts and education. And to be honest, Pat, the data that you just said is pretty shocking. I think if people knew about that, and I'll give you an example from my own life. I have a lot of friends whose kids were applying to college a couple years ago. I cannot tell you how often I would hear them say, well, if my child was Asian American, he or she would get into a UC. They said that all the time. These are pretty progressive people who, again, are not educated. So I think with data and, like Antoinette said, with education, we can combat it.
Okay, how about you, JC?
Thanks, Pat, for the question. I think fellow panelists did a phenomenal job explaining this. I see a lot of divide and conquer, as Oyango mentioned a little earlier. Little Machiavellian tactics are often successful, unfortunately. And what I have noticed is that there's a lot of diversity among the Asian community. I've been to the NAPABA conference. I know a lot of leaders in that community who are very supportive of DEI efforts, who understand why it's so important for the legal community to reflect society. And you'd be surprised. So it's interesting how Blum is focusing on a strategy which I consider to be partly nefarious. And the reason why is there's something so Machiavellian about it that he goes to another marginalized group and says, hey, look over there. Look what they're doing to you. When in fact, if you have all the data and all the information, it's clearly not the case. We've actually been working together. You know, the civil rights struggle has been African American, Black, has been Mexican, has been Latinos from all over the world, has been Asian Americans fighting together to break down a lot of these barriers. To have someone now for political agenda try to break that up saddens me, and it should sadden a lot of folks who are involved in that movement.
Yeah, that's correct. Tom?
Well, I think the facts that you've laid out, Pat, are what it's essential that people understand, that this was a cynical strategy. I have to note it was a continuation of his cynical strategy from before. The previous cases that he was behind that went to the Supreme Court, the Fisher University of Texas cases 10 years ago, and the University of Michigan cases 20 years ago, he used white women for a similar reason. It was not about finding the best plaintiff, because facts would come out that none of those were the best plaintiffs in terms of the issues. He was looking for women to be the face of his challenge to affirmative action. And he just took it a different direction with a new step of divide and conquer with respect to another group of students of color. I think it's important just to add to what you laid out beyond the cynical strategy, that in fact, Asian Americans as a whole support affirmative action. We know that here in California, my experience on these issues goes back to the original state measure outlawing affirmative action, Proposition 209 in 1996. And I think it's important to remind folks back then, over 60% of the Asian American voters voted no on the proposition to eliminate affirmative action. And that's because the Asian American community, first of all, has an understanding of discrimination from their own experiences. And second, I think they understand the value of diversity in the classroom, not just for the students who may have had race considered in admitting them, but really for all the students there. That's the basis of diversity. So I think there is a public policy level of support that was not reflected in his cynical strategy. I think it's also important to note that in the case itself, as you know, Pat, there were multiple Asian American groups and individuals involved in support of continuing the consideration of race at Harvard and UNC. In fact, the bulk of the evidence from within the Asian American community was actually in support of continuing the Harvard and UNC admissions programs. So this divide and conquer strategy was flawed from the beginning, and we can't allow it to allow any more division.
That's right, and I agree with everyone that we just need to expand our education, share the facts, and to try to head off any further false narratives that they might try to use to convince individuals that affirmative action should be eliminated, as well as other race-based strategies and so forth. I forgot to do this, and I see it in the chat. For those of you who are in the audience, if you have any questions, please add them in the Q&A and your comments in the chat box. And towards the end of this program, we will be taking up some of those questions and asking our panelists to respond. Now that we've discussed the mindset and the holding in the Harvard decision, let's turn to how the case might impact the work of our pipeline programs. I think it's been made clear through Tom and others that the case does not apply to any programs or anything else beyond educational institutions and their admissions programs. So I think pipeline programs in this instance, we're safe. We can continue doing what we're doing, and as we've all said, to educate students, prepare them for their applications so that we create a level playing field as best as possible. And so they're as competitive as possible in the admissions arena. But there is no real definitive information or holdings that relate to any entities outside of the educational institutions. The closest that we come to any kind of guidance comes from the Department of Justice and Department of Education. They issued a guidance for educational institutions as to what they can continue to do that would still fall within the permissible activities under the Harvard decision. If anyone wants to review this, all you have to do is Google DOJ, DOE guidance in relation to SFFA and versus Harvard, and you'll find that whole list of guidance listings. Basically, what the DOJ is saying is that entities, educational entities, higher education groups may continue to articulate missions and goals tied to student body diversity and may use all legally permissible methods to achieve that diversity. They can continue to use strategies that remove barriers and expand opportunities for all. They then turn to specific situations in terms of targeted outreach, recruitment, and pathway programs, which are another name for pipeline programs. That they use the name interchangeably. And I want to take a moment here to highlight what they say about those, because even though Harvard doesn't apply to our pipeline programs, we could take this as some kind of advice in the event that we sense that there are going to be future challenges against pipeline programs in this respect. So it helps us to kind of find out what the federal government thinks, how we might incorporate these kinds of suggestions into our programs to ensure that we're exempt from any expanded application to Harvard. The guidance states that universities can continue to consider race as well as other factors like geographic residency, financial means, socioeconomic status, family background, and parental education level in identifying students for outreach and recruiting, so long as targeted groups are not given preference in the admissions process. The guidance explains that institutions may operate pathway programs that aim to increase the diversity of the pool of college-ready applicants. They offer a preference. Universities may also offer a preference in admissions to students who participate in such pathway programs, but only if the institution selects students for participation in the program based on non-racial criteria. The guidance states there's several ways that institutions may review their admissions processes to reflect institutional values and commitments, and does not prohibit the use of certain race-neutral admission strategies for obtaining a diverse range of backgrounds and experiences. The guidance indicates that institutions may continue to provide support services to underrepresented students through offices of diversity, campus cultural centers, and other campus resources, so long as the services are available to all students. Also, support clubs, activities, and affinity groups with race-related themes are still permitted, again, as long as they are open to all students regardless of race. The guidance provides that institutions may continue to collect and utilize demographic data, including race, as long as they comply with state and federal privacy laws, and do not use the data related to race to influence admissions. They do provide disclaimers that the guidance does not have the full force and effect of law. They do not impose new legal requirements. They do not bind the federal government in the exercise of their enforcement authorities. And they do recommend that institutions seek legal advice in developing and modifying strategies and programs that might be seen as attempting to evade the limitations of the Harvard decision, such as employing any selection criteria for admissions or pathway programs that could be characterized as proxies for race. Now, with that in mind, so let me ask you this. We know that the case does not apply to any areas beyond educational institutions in the admissions process. And I think we might anticipate that there will be continued challenges to expand the application of Harvard. So knowing what the DOJ and Department of Education are saying in terms of guidance to educational institutions, would it be wise for us as pipeline programs to look at that really closely and begin perhaps planning for when those challenges occur against our pipeline programs?
I think that's absolutely right. It is a time for preparing and planning. I want to emphasize that it is not a time for anyone to overreact to this decision by changing what they're doing today. There's no reason for precipitously acting to change existing pipeline or other programs. This applies more generally. I think second, the guidance is very useful, but it is important to remember that that guidance is likely to change if there is a change in administration. And so guidance is just that. You have to take a close look at the law, of course, and SFFA does not change the law other than with respect to higher education institutions. That's important to note. It has, however, emboldened Ed Bloom and others like him to challenge diversity, equity, and inclusion initiatives in all kinds of other arenas. We've seen it already. We've seen challenges to law firms, to a venture fund, to some limited government programs. So we know that they have been emboldened by what they see as a tremendous victory for their cause in the Harvard decision, and so are likely to look to apply existing law in a more aggressive way. And that's why it's important to plan and be prepared. It is also important to recognize that existing law with respect to other efforts may extend well beyond what the Constitution or Title VI say, which is all that was at issue in the Harvard case. That means that, of course, in some states like California, like Washington, Arizona, Michigan, there are state laws that have previously been enacted that may limit the ability to consider race in other education programs, as well as in other arenas, including employment and contracting. So you've got to be aware of state law and how it might interact with what you are doing. You have to be aware of other federal laws, including a law referenced already in the Q&A about contracting, 42 USC section 1981, that applies regardless of whether you receive government funding at all. So there are a number of existing laws that provide restrictions in this area, and it's simply a time, given how emboldened the folks who seek to eliminate these programs. It's a time to be careful in looking at what you're doing. It's not a time, as I said previously, to act quickly to somehow change what you're doing, because the law has not changed. And I just want to emphasize a couple of things that came out in your question, Pat. First of all, absolutely nothing wrong with data. In fact, there are obligations to collect data in federal and state laws that apply to almost every program that we're talking about. And so you should continue to collect data. It's what helps us to determine the continued existence of significant disparities in representation at higher education institutions across the country. Second, it's important, and this comes out in the guidance and the excerpts that you described, Pat, that the Supreme Court has, in a related context, determined that only people have a race. So a theme, an issue, a subject matter, even themes, issues, and subject matters that may be defined in part by race, those do not have a race. So if you center your program around addressing an issue, addressing a concern that may be in part defined by race, that is not a race-conscious program. I'm going to give you an example from my own organization, MALDEF. We award law school scholarships. We need more applications, so please get the word out. We were initially funded by Ford Foundation 55 years ago to have a law school scholarship program to increase the pipeline of Latino and Latina lawyers coming out to serve the Latino community. But for at least 30 years, we have not restricted our scholarship to recipients who are Latino. However, the main criterion for awarding a scholarship is a demonstrated commitment to serving the Latino community when you graduate from law school. Now, that's grounded in fact. The Latino community, like other communities of color, is underserved by the existing bar, but it is also race neutral. We have had Black, white, Asian applicants who receive scholarships because they have that demonstrated commitment to serve the Latino community. But in the end, the vast majority of our recipients who have that demonstrated commitment are Latino. But it is not a race-conscious or race-limited scholarship, even though the criterion, the issue that we seek to address, is defined by the Latino community. That under the law is not race-based. So keeping that in mind, that issues, subject matters, by the way, I think this is particularly important in the ongoing debate about ethnic studies and critical race theory. What the Supreme Court said in SFFA has absolutely nothing to do with curriculum, because a curriculum, like an issue, like a subject, doesn't have a race. So even if it's Black studies, Latino studies, subject matters do not have a race under the law. So I think keeping those things in mind as we review the guidance is important, as we all look carefully and anticipate this broadened campaign by Ed Bloom and others to finance challenges to all of the important programs that continue to exist to address the long-standing and continuing patterns of inequity and exclusion in our country.
We're making an important point. We need to share this with everybody to be sure that they all understand that as they move forward with their programs. So at this point, I'm going to move forward. I get nervous about timing here, so I'm going to move forward to ask our pipeline program directors for a little bit more information about their programs, and we'll start with Cindy, then go to JC, and then Antoinette. I have a series of questions, kind of like quick fire questions, just so you can let us know a little bit about your programs, so the audience can get an idea of what kinds of activities and programs you provide, and if they are consistent with their programs, or if they differ, or if they want to expand to replicate what you're doing. So first of all, when and why was your program founded?
It was founded in 2019, and it was very personal. I actually am the product of affirmative action, proud to say. And first generation law student, I had absolutely no help in getting into law school. To be honest, I have no idea how I got in based on my crappy LSAT score. So I did not want to I didn't want that to happen to other students. So it's very personal. And the other reason is to diversify the profession. Even though we live in California, I live in California, very diverse state, our legal profession is still woefully undiverse, not diverse.
very undiverse. Not even almost 20% diverse, and the rest is white. It's been consistent that way too. What are your missions and vision for your program?
So our stated goal is to change the face of the legal profession, and we do this by preparing underrepresented students to become successful law school applicants, law students, and agents of social change.
Okay, when you say underrepresented, do you elaborate on that in your outreach?
So when our diversity factors are LGBTQ+, first generation college student, low SES, and students of color. We do not ask anything about race, about ethnicity. We never have. It's not on our website. That was not because I thought in the future affirmative action would be overturned. It just happens that we can get to those things with these other factors. We also have an other. So we have formerly incarcerated, DACA, undocumented, veterans. So there's a whole lot of other underrepresented that's not even listed in the application.
Okay, great. And you kind of excuse me, you kind of answered the next question: who can apply and how are participants selected? How are they selected when you get all these applications from underrepresented students?
So we read the applications, and then there's an interview process. We're actually going through it right now. This year, last year we had 217 applications. This year we have 370. It's kind of ridiculous how many we have, which to me shows the need for these types of programs. So we're now in round 2 of the interviews. And the people who can apply, other than those diversity factors, you need to be a junior or senior in college or a college graduate.
And how many participants do you accept to the program?
So this year we're going to be accepting 70. So we have a Northern California chapter, Southern California, and now a law firm, Munger, Tolles & Olson, has partnered with us. So we're going to have an MTO chapter. So we'll have 70, which means we're saying no to 300 students.
Right. Okay, and just some basic highlights of your program.
Okay, we have monthly workshops where they learn how to write their resume, diversity statement, personal statement. We talk about social capital. There are panels of attorneys, both social justice panels and practitioner panels, so that we can expose them to not only all sorts of diverse attorneys, diversity in practice. They are assigned a law student and attorney mentor. We have LSAT prep, which, to be honest, is why a lot of them apply. And then we have a pre-L boot camp, which is the bridge between when they get accepted to law school and that first day or first couple months of law school. I was completely lost. I want to make sure that they're not lost, and we're trying to level the playing field so that they can feel comfortable on that first day of law school.
Okay, great. With the focus of the Harvard case on applications, personal statements, and so forth, have you increased your focus on that with the students, or are you doing the same as usual, or what?
I'm going to be, I mean, we're doing nothing different. We are, yeah, that's my answer. We're doing nothing different.
Okay, great. And are you focusing on assisting the students with obtaining their letters of recommendation? I noticed in some of the literature, especially with the evaluation of Asian applicants, that some of the letters of recommendation weren't really highlighting the actual skills and so forth of students, and incorporated more of the stereotypes and the assumptions that are made about Asian students. Are you working with them on letters of recommendation?
We do. We have a whole workshop on letters of recommendation, both for professors and for employers, what they should say to them, the information that they should give to them. And then we also focus on addenda. A lot of our students have a variety of things that they have to add, like low LSAT, maybe character and fitness issues. So that's very important also.
Okay, great. And data collection. What data do you collect, Benny, and how do you use it?
So the data we collect is how many juniors, how many seniors, how many are transfer students. So we have probably a third coming from community college, which I think is amazing. How many are first gen, low SES? There is literally no data collection on race, like zero. And we use this for our funders because our funders want to know, like, we're giving you this money because you're saying that you're helping these students get into law school and you're helping to diversify the profession. We want to make sure that our money is going to good use. And I can assure them that it is. And in fact, we're going into our 5th year, which I can't believe. We have close to a 100% acceptance rate to law school.
Wow, that's great. You kind of touched on this. What kind of funding and support do you receive?
Individual donors, law firms, some foundations. Thank you, Oyango, and some corporate, no government.
Okay, I think that's important. Maybe important in the future. And how important are volunteers for your program, and how do you recruit them?
So important. So we have the law student mentors, the attorney mentors. I mean, now it's word of mouth. And well, first of all, I've been in the LA area for many years, and so I have a pretty big network of friends and colleagues. But it's now kind of word of mouth. Yes, we very much rely on them. The attorney mentors are assigned one fellow. They look at their resume, they review their diversity statement, their personal statement. So they are very involved. The law student mentors are there more for moral support, and because they're at the place where these students want to be. Almost all of our law student mentors are diverse in some respect, however you define diverse. So yeah, we rely heavily. Oh, and then we have our workshop presenters, which we have these eight academies. And so we have lots of lawyers come in on a Saturday, giving up their Saturday and coming in to help our students.
Okay, great. I know that we've been in touch with you since the founding of your program, and have been really supportive, and I'm really happy with the success that you've had with the students, and close to 100% acceptance rate in law school is really great.
Thanks.
So let's move to you, JC, with CLEO. When and why was your program founded?
Thank you, Pat. Great listening to your presentation, Cindy. Our program was founded during the Civil Rights Movement in 1968. This is actually our 55th year. Our founders saw that the legal profession is unique. It's important. We safeguard democracy in so many ways. Our profession is in the Constitution. We represent those criminal defendants that are wrongly accused. We really have an important role in society, attorneys, and they recognized that with less than 2% African-American attorneys in the country at the time, and even less in other groups, that there needed to be something to be done. So they delved in and realized the importance of the pipeline, the importance of the pathway to help students that come from backgrounds like where I'm from, where the only attorney we may have known was Matlock or Judge Mathis, and give us an opportunity to know that we can aspire to be attorneys, and we can make it happen if we have an opportunity to learn how to think like attorneys, learn how to read, learn how to break down a case, and surround ourselves with people that are just as inspired. Amazing things happen. So we've had 30,000 alumni come through our program. Every year we have 1,100 students come through our program. We have an amazing pipeline that works with students from freshman year all the way through the day that they're sworn into the bar. And we realized that in 1968. I'm happy to be part of this because I can see in Cindy's presentation, I know from Antoinette and a lot of the work that Oyango have done, we're all a team in this effort to make sure that the legal profession reflects society. And what's so interesting, Pat, is that we have students from all backgrounds, not just folks that you may automatically consider underrepresented background. I have been in programs, we have students that are white students from as far as Southern Texas participate in our programs as well, which is a testament to what diversity and pipeline programs like ours have done, as you heard from Cindy. Since we don't even discriminate on race, to see people from all over and the entire rainbow want to be part of it is incredible.
Okay, you kind of went through some of the questions I was going to ask, but in terms of the participants who apply, how are they selected?
We have an academic affairs department that does a lot of the recruiting, and they work with their students on their application to our programs. We read their essays, we analyze their resumes, we look at their transcripts. And because of the many programs we have a lot of applications come in. So it's a team effort to make sure that all students have a shot at fair consideration. Now, there are some students that are not going to make it, and we do everything we can to help them prepare for the next round of applications. Now, some of our programs, like we have a program called the Road to Law School, Pat, that helps freshman and sophomore year students in college begin thinking about law school. So we'll get them together with mentors, with attorneys, and get them ready to start thinking about that LSAT exam that Oyango mentioned a little earlier on. That's coming down the pike. We want to get you ready. The great thing is that we have a program called Jumpstart the LSAT that takes care of juniors and seniors so that they can start taking practice LSAT exams. And that's what we're doing this Saturday at Fordham University. You can visit CLEOinc.org to get some more information on our programs. But then the wonderful thing, Pat, is that we have a lot of applications come in for our Pre-Law Summer Institute. It's our flagship program. And that's where we sit down and we really examine and we work with our students to make sure that their resumes are on point, that their personal statements are on point. That's that 6 to 8 week program prior to your first year of law school. This year, we did a hybrid program where you got to do online and in person. We did it at Mitchell Hamlin in Minnesota. Students get to dorm at a law school, work with professors, actually know what it's like to sit in a law school classroom and feel the warmth of opening up those pages in the library. And what happens at the end of that is that folks can't wait to that first day of law school because now they're prepared. They know about the IRAC method. They know how to take notes. They know how to brief a case. And that's our goal. Our goal is to make sure that students know you may have been born on the other side of the track. You may have been dodging bullets, gang members, and chasing away from poverty, while others were dodging butterflies and going on their lessons for archery. But we promise you that if you go through our programs, you'll be able to go toe-to-toe with anyone in the country. So we're very proud of our programs.
Oh, that sounds great. Do you collect data and how do you use it?
More and more, Cindy hit it on the nose. Funders want to see data. They want to see, hey, I'm supporting you. I want to know how our funds are working. And that's a wonderful thing. We're working very closely with a professional, Dr. Kershaw, who's working very hard on getting the stats that we need. We want to know not only, did you come through our program? Which program did you come through? How did you hear about us? That's all great and dandy. But how were your LSAT scores? How did you do in law school? Did you pass the bar? What field did you enter into afterwards? Did you become an attorney? Did you become an executive? Did you become a teacher? And one of the things I wanted to share about the data collection is I want to make sure funders, we need you funders, it's now more than ever. We want to make sure that you don't apply the tenets of business. I remember when I was getting my MBA, it was all about profit margins and making sure that we're meeting the bottom line. I want to make sure you remember that the work that we do at Pipelines is to change the world. It really is. The work that we do is to change the world. And it means taking folks that may not have had a shot and get them to a place where they can go toe to toe. And many of those people want to come back to their communities and become teachers or go into not-for-profit work. So I want you to be mindful that how you measure success is important, because the way you measure success is how you're going to continue supporting us. So keep in mind that we want you to think outside of the box. We don't want you to think about bottom lines. We want you to think, well, how are we contributing to society? And consider statistics in a very different way. So ask us, who are our teachers? Who are our not-for-profit leaders? Who are going to work in government back in their communities? Because that matters.
You're right. And the funders always, first of all, focus on the quantitative, and then they move on to the qualitative, which is a lot harder to describe. So as you're all collecting data, you need to figure out how you're going to use it to show what the quality and the impact that you're making in terms of your goals and your mission. And how important are volunteers for your program?
They're so important. We have 30,000 alumni around the country. A lot of them come back and want to participate in our events. But what we see more and more are the young attorneys from underrepresented backgrounds are really looking forward to an opportunity to speak to students. We constantly have programs at CLEO called CLEO Connection, where we have pre-law students meet with attorneys that can give them some inspiration to talk to them about how to get prepared for law school. And even some law students come in and want to network. So we're constantly looking for volunteers, attorneys that want to give back to their community to come speak to our students, because you will find the hungriest, the most successful students come from our programs and come from the folks that we serve. Great.
And then let's turn to Antoinette with just the beginning. What When and why was your program founded?
So our program started in 1992 with a dinner of federal judges of color to celebrate the fact that they exist as federal judges of color. And they had such a good time, they thought we should get together again and make a difference and do something to ensure that there are always federal judges of color. And that's kind of how JTB started. Well, that's exactly how JTB started back in 1992.
And regarding the participants, how many do you have? Your national program? How can they apply, and how are they selected?
Well, you can apply for all of our programs on our website at jtb.org, and we have programming that starts in middle school and it goes through law school graduation. We have about 800 students who go through our programs every year. We have virtual programs and in-person programs, probably about 15 a year. We program in 7 cities across the country. I'm sorry, what else? Did I answer everything you said, Pat?
Yeah, I think so.
Oh, okay.
Great summary of your program highlights, by the way.
Okay.
Are you planning to, or have you made any changes in response to the Harvard decision regarding applications, personal statements, and so forth?
We have not for our programming, and we don't have to. And the reason that we don't particularly is because our programs have always been open to everyone. And there is no selection criteria for all of our programs except one. It's just about space. So if there is space for you and you apply, then you're in our program. The only program that we have where you have to be selected for is our SJID program. And that is an externship with judges in the summer. So the judges have to select the students in order for them to participate. But none of that program is, the judges don't have any demographic information about the students, and they're not selected in any way pertaining to race or any other demographic information.
And you kind of answered this, but how important are volunteers for your program?
Volunteers are extremely important, and they really are, not to sound cliche, the heart of our programming. We couldn't do our programming without volunteers. They're in the classrooms with the students. They lead presentations that our staff develop. And for me personally, our programming is not just for the students, but it's also for the volunteers. To see students that they wouldn't otherwise interact with, and to change their impressions about students and their capabilities. So we couldn't do what we do without volunteers. It would be impossible.
The volunteers are critical to all of our programs.
They are.
Did I ask you about data collection? If not, what data is compiled and for what purpose?
We do collect data, and just like everyone else, for funders, they want to know that what we say we're doing is what we're doing. Our mission is to encourage students of color and from other underrepresented areas to pursue career and leadership opportunities in the law. We want to see the legal profession reflect the people that they serve. And in order to show that we're doing that, we have to collect data. This data is not shared with anyone other than funders who request it.
Okay, good. One other question for all of you, just that I'm just thinking of, what methods do you use to collect data and track your students? Like Cindy, you know that your students get accepted to law school. How do you follow them once they graduate from your programs?
Time consuming. We just follow them. We email them. I bug them a lot. I mean, it really, I'm serious. It's kind of a time suck, and I'm not saying that in a negative way, but we email them, we follow them, we stalk them. But here's the thing. Most of them want to stay in contact with us because they know, and I'm not, okay, this is going to sound so, they know that without programs like ours, they would not be where they are. And they say that all the time, like, without LEAP, I would not be at so-and-so law school. So they want to give back. So it's just the few that are kind of annoying to follow, but it really is LinkedIn, Facebook, Instagram, and then, if I have to, I'll, have to go to their house or something. Kidding.
JC and Antoinette, do you have any other approaches to collecting that post-graduation data?
We do the same. Oh, I'm so sorry. Go ahead, JC.
I'm so sorry. Go ahead, Antoinette.
We do many of the same things that Cindy described. It's a little more difficult for us because we start in middle school. So a lot can change with where you live, your email address, it's not coolguy@gmail.com. So we really try to keep in touch with the students and the parents. Additionally, one thing that we did at JTB, our Cornerstone program was for high school students. We started to develop programming for undergrads as a way to keep in touch with them. Primarily in the undergrad space, we refer them to CLEO and organizations, partners who do that much more than we do, but it's a difficult task. And we use a lot of the same ways in addition to creating programs to do that.
To answer your question, I know we're running short on time, but that's why we're so thankful at CLEO for NCBE. Now, they have been so incredible to us in helping get our students to pass the bar exam. They support us in so many ways, including a new method for us to start getting data in a much more sophisticated and modernized fashion that I think is going to be cutting edge. And it's going to take a lot of work, but we're out there in the field. And Cindy and Antoinette mentioned it. It's just tough because people change information. So we're out there on LinkedIn and we're following up. But with a 10 to 15% success rate nationally, and Oyango, you can help me out with this, collecting data that matters, it's becoming difficult. So we're always encouraging our alumni to stay in contact with us wherever they go.
Okay, great. So and you all know, noting that we're running out of time and we want to save some time for questions, I have a couple of final questions for you all to weigh in. Considering the Harvard decision, what final feedback do you all have for pipeline programs throughout the country regarding their continued DEI efforts? We'll start with Antoinette.
Well, one thing that we've tried to do is communicate. I mentioned before that there aren't a lot of changes that we have to make to our programming. To communicate to stakeholders, not only to make our mission clear, which we've always done, but also to reinforce the fact that our programs have always and are open for everyone. So communicating that as effectively as we communicate our mission.
Okay, JC?
I think it's important for us to remember that this Blum decision and what we're seeing around the country should really motivate us to keep doing what we're doing, because what we focus on here at Pipelines is getting students ready to go toe-to-toe. And the last thing we need is, and Antoinette mentioned, communication is so important. We want to make sure people understand what the case said, and that's why I'm so happy Tom was here to describe what the case actually says. We got to see some guidelines, and what you're going to see is that we have an incredible opportunity to continue motivating students to apply, to come through our pipeline programs, and not self-select out. Don't listen to that noise. And we want to make sure that administrators understand what the case actually says. Don't feel like you're walking on eggshells when you're reading these personal statements and you're reading about how someone's background shaped who they are. So it's so important that we communicate effectively and educate ourselves on what's happening and keep up the great work.
Thanks. Anyone else? Cindy?
Well, like JC said, I was just looking at something from the case. The case says that race in and of itself cannot be a factor. It's never been for us. We have told our students, just like JC said, do not self-select out. This case has nothing to do with you. We need to level the playing field. We still need to diversify the legal profession. So I'm hopeful. I mean, I personally, and this could be super naive. I'm just pretending like almost the case doesn't exist, that it doesn't apply to us. Now, having said that, he's now suing MoFo and Perkins, so I'm hoping it doesn't come to us. But I remain hopeful. Yeah.
And Pat, I'd be remiss if I didn't. I think I'm going to try to answer this and look at two questions that we've received as well in combination to your answer. And one, I believe, happens to be my former law professor, Ms. Verdun. I think one of the things, and she asked about, is there a way to go about being proactive in this, not waiting for defense. One of the things that we've done when I was with the Bar Association, the Bar Foundation in California, is we give out fellowships, particularly based on our efforts to diversify the legal profession. It's not based on whether you're Black or brown or any other specific racial factor, but our fellowships, our funding that we provide to programs like LEAP and others is based off programs that we know that are working to diversify the legal profession. One of the things that we were contemplating during my last couple of months there is looking to engage outside counsel to help us prepare for potential lawsuits that may be coming down the pipeline. This gets to another question that's asked, so there were several affinity bar groups or affinity organizations rather that were sued recently on small business development organizations who were giving direct grants or funding to Black women. One of the things that we wanted to make sure that we're doing is preparing for those types of battles, because it's not just the big guys and big gals that are getting sued. These individuals are looking to smaller organizations to make an example out of and accumulate these types of wins. So the more you can be prepared from a legal strategy, from a proactive perspective, I don't think there's anything to march into court on, but the more you can be prepared to fend off some of these potential battles, to not be afraid and be courageous in your mission and understand, have conviction behind what it is that you're doing. And three, follow some of the guidance that in some of the reports that we talked about, and also some of the things that we're talking about now, as far as avoiding some of the pitfalls and traps of falling into inadvertent discriminatory type of behavior based on race. Looking at your programming, looking at the effects of them. Are you impacting more than just a specific demographic of people or racial makeup of people? So I think from a proactive perspective, it's really about the preparation. It's really about being prepared for, rather than just waiting for something to happen and then responding. But Professor Verdun, I don't think it's a matter of running into court on any particular cause of action. It's kind of hard pressed to see if there's a cause of action that exists other than intimidation or wrongful intimidation of some sort, maybe interference of some type of contractual relations if they pick the wrong type of situation to go up against. But all those are far-fetched theories that will be circumstantial.
Okay, thanks.
Pat, I just wanted to say what I heard from these three great programs. I want to emphasize a couple of things. First of all, after SFFA, it's critically important that pipeline programs continue to articulate their interest and their goal of addressing underrepresentation of people of color. Should not be shying away from recognizing that as a goal. There is nothing in the case that says that is illegitimate at all. It is in fact an ongoing and very significant phenomenon in our society, and we should not be shy about saying we have to, as a society, address these underrepresentation and inequity issues, and pipeline programs are a critical part of it. What these pipeline programs have done is, while articulating that as a goal, they are using non-racially exclusionary decision-making for who's eligible for the programs, and that's what is required by law even before SFFA. But maintaining that spoken commitment is critically important after this case. In fact, I would point out that after SFFA, we no longer have to couch our goals solely in terms of diversity. I've mentioned previously diversity is important, but we were stuck with that diversity-only framework because of Justice Powell's decision in Bakke in 1978, where he refused to recognize that eliminating societal discrimination was a compelling government interest. So we can go back to being much more open and talk openly about eliminating the effects of societal discrimination, ongoing effects. And we can be more open about talking about equity as the first goal, diversity as the second goal. We are no longer, after this decision, stuck in a framework that, in my point of view, perhaps overemphasized diversity to the exclusion of these equally important goals of equity and discrimination elimination.
Yes, agree.
Yeah, thanks, Tom. There's a question here. Can you talk about whether it's wise or unwise to continue to use race as a criterion for eligibility for things like law student scholarships and so forth?
Yeah, I can start with that. From a bar association and foundation perspective, it was never about, we've never led with, if you're Black, apply for this fellowship. or apply for this scholarship. That is, of course, or if you're Latino, apply for this scholarship, or Asian. That is, of course, the objective when you look at the demographics of our makeup of our legal institution, of our legal industry, rather. That is our objective, to help diversify the legal profession. So we are targeting, trying to increase the number of attorneys in that area. So we're asking and soliciting and marketing for people from those backgrounds to apply for those scholarships and fellowships. But if somebody white came along and they had a great application, you're not going to say you don't qualify because you're not Asian, African American, or Latino or Latina. You're gonna evaluate the application in that regard. The same in our programming that we've done. And Pat, you're familiar with the work that we've done under the foundation, where we actually put together a high school law academy, and that's a program that's sanctioned under state law. We don't identify the high schools that we were going into based off, is it 100% Black or is it 100% Latino? It's also based off a socioeconomic configuration that the State Department of Education comes up with, and whether or not those high schools normally, the racial makeup is tied to that low economic status. So again, where Cindy was going, you kind of have other factors and other things that you can you can be in the right ballpark 90 to 95% of the time based off all the other factors, and hit your target demographic by asking the right questions and getting the other criteria that's necessary in order to effectuate your programming. But in short, to wrap up, race is not a leading question or a factor that you have on scholarship or fellowship applications. In my personal opinion, unsolicited, not legal advice, if you do have race as a determining factor, that's going to get you in trouble even before this decision came out.
Right. And just to piggyback on what Oyango's saying, for the California programs that the California Lawyers Foundation are working with at this point, those are California Partnership Academies. They are supported by the legislature. They're funded by the state legislature. They're administered by the California Department of Education, and they survived Prop 209. So we have no misgivings about working with the high school law academies, because we know that they're safe in California. Also, I think Cindy mentioned the community colleges. Community colleges are part of the pipeline in California. Community colleges are the majority students of color. We don't have to talk about race in community colleges. And in California, there's a process where community college students, if they comply with the transfer requirements of the UC system or the Cal State system, they're guaranteed to be transferred into the upper graduate system, and they don't have to look at race. So in the programs that we work on in California with high schools and community colleges, we never had to consider race, because public schools and community colleges were already a majority of students of color. And we looked at all the other characteristics and qualities and attributes that we could then support and enhance so that students can successfully transition along the educational pipeline.
I want to say, I think that the California experience is instructive just to say it, because Prop 209 long ago made the legal change. Mm-hmm. It called into question education scholarships that are race exclusive. But there are around the country, outside of the states that have Prop 209 equivalents, many scholarships that are race exclusive. And I think that we have to say, I'm not interested in giving Ed Bloom any easy wins in court. I think we have to say that those scholarships really need to be reviewed, because they are vulnerable to a potential legal challenge if they are in fact race exclusionary, and many of them across the country are. But they can often be changed, as the answers suggest, into race neutral, but still get you, I think Oyango is right, it gets you to 95% of your goal. Then you ought to be doing that to avoid giving an easy victory to Ed Bloom and his folks. So I think it's important to note higher education scholarships very close to what was decided in SFFA, and may be the first most vulnerable targets of Ed Bloom and his ilk. And I think even within the guidance that you directed people to, folks, to Pat, that there's a suggestion that you need to use race neutral criteria even if it is obviously in service of a goal, very legitimate goal of addressing inequity.
Right. There's a question here that asks for the reference to the study that I talked about in terms of affirmative action with the Asian and white students. It was a study by the National Bureau of Economic Research. And if you just go online, NBER, National Bureau of Economic Research, and the title of the study, the article was "The Disparate Impact of College Admissions Policies on Asian American Applicants." I think that just you enter that in Google and you'll find it. And if not, we'll post it and share that with everyone else. There's a question here that I think is important. How do you think this decision will affect diversity pipelines for businesses looking for diverse applicants?
Well, I'll kick us off. We've already seen it happen with law firms, right? Which are businesses in and of itself. I think they're going to run across the right firm that's willing to challenge it. I think the two that decided to, let's just say, make amends, who decided not to deal with the legal battle that they were facing. They found ways to continue to do what it is that they were trying to do by making modifications, softening their language a little bit. I think there's going to come a time where you have a business that won't. And I think as that plays out, we'll have to see. But just my gut tells me that while this case may have a chilling effect on some of those, on some businesses from wanting to participate in this space, I got to call a spade and say, I think that might be a cop out. I think if businesses want to be about supporting diversity, equity, and inclusion, particularly in various professions that are underrepresented, like the legal profession, I think there's opportunities for them to do so without, feeling like they're going to be brought into a lawsuit in some form that's problematic for them. So with that being said, I think it will have some impacts on that, some that we know, some that we don't know about, because we don't always hear what goes on in the boardroom. But at the end of the day, I do think the decision itself does have a chilling effect on businesses. But for those that do get involved and get engaged and are open about their support for underrepresented communities and trying to help these pipeline programs or pathway programs succeed, I think there's going to be some opportunities there for them to continue to do so.
So I just wanted to add, if the question is how will this affect your applicant pool, I think we have to acknowledge, based on experience from California with Proposition 209, that selective institutions will see a decrease in the number of graduates of color that they are producing. And we have to do lots of work to try to minimize that decrease, including looking at the discriminatory criteria that I discussed earlier that those institutions are looking for. But yes, the number of students, graduates of color coming from selective institutions is going to go down as a result of this decision. And we need to make adjustments. So I would suggest those who are interested in maintaining a strong level of diversity need to expand the schools that you're looking at hiring from. Because if you leave it with the most selective institutions, there is going to be a decrease in the availability of graduates of color from those schools. We have to acknowledge that, and that's why we have to work on the policy changes. But in the short term, there's going to be a decrease, and you need to look at what you can do to expand the applicants you're looking at.
Pat, a 20-second supplement to that. I am a product of a historically Black college and university. There it is right there. There is nothing wrong with going to a HBCU and recruiting individuals directly from that institution. There's a number of them throughout the United States. Pick one. So I just wanted to add that if you want to be about diversifying your applicant pool, you just have to be vigilant and intentional about doing so and not rely on these types of decisions to scare you away from doing it.
And to add on that, it was always so negative when you ask law firms or other groups, why didn't you hire? Why didn't you, or even law schools, why didn't you recruit and admit? And they'll always say, well, we would like to, but we couldn't find any. We couldn't find any students. And we all know that's not true. I mean, just given the large number of schools that are out there, the number of graduates and the criteria and the factors that we need to look at in terms of what makes an effective lawyer. There's a study out there from Marge Schultz on 26 factors of effective lawyering. those aren't tested in the bar exam. Those aren't taught in the law schools. And there are a lot of successful lawyers out there who didn't graduate from those top tier schools, but are really excellent and successful attorneys. And it's a matter of expanding your recruitment and outreach and admitting those students and preparing them for their successful legal profession. We have one final question here. Is there a way to go on the offense in support of equity and justice? And how restricted is our advocacy in light of such a decidedly conservative Supreme Court that is overruling plenty of longstanding precedent? I'm going to shoot that to you, Tom.
We can go on the offensive, and I think we've had lots of ideas thrown out in this webinar. Right? We have to look and demand that institutions, law schools, and universities look very carefully at all of their admissions practices. That starts with recruitment that has been too restricted to certain urban areas to the exclusion of other areas. We know that from studies, all the way through the criteria that we know are infected with the ongoing effects of discrimination and need to be reviewed and changed in many respects. We need to change our definition of merit, as you just described, Pat, to better match what we know today. And that is not really served by the criteria that we use. So there is an effort to be made at universities and law schools to change how admissions decisions are made. But beyond that, I think that there are ways for public policies at state and local level, without using race as a criterion, to use some of the other strong indicators of inequity. We've heard some of them from the pipeline programs criteria. We need to enact policies that use those non-racial criteria that nonetheless correlate with the inequities faced by people of color and demand that they be implemented. Here, California, it took a long time. We're now 27 years after Prop 209. It took my state a long time to get there, but they began to make some changes. I mean, the fact that our education pipeline, K through 12, now has additional funding for foster youth, for low SES, and for English language learners. Those are not race-linked categories, but they get at some of the inequities that we know we see in the education pipeline. So it's policies like that we need to demand in a very proactive way.
Pat, in addition to the pipelines that Tom mentioned, one way to become aggressive and be proactive on this and go on the offensive is to visit LEAP, Just the Beginning, CLEOinc.org, MalDef, and consider supporting us, because we are in the forefront. We're the ones out there recruiting and making things happen. So to be honest with you, that's one concrete way that we can actually work together to really change the world.
Antoinette, did you want to add anything? I see you nodding.
Nodding in agreement. I don't know what more I can add.
Okay, great. So we're kind of towards the end of our program. We have 2 minutes left. I have some housekeeping notes here and so forth. But first of all, I want to thank all of our speakers for sharing your expertise, your feedback, and your inspiration for our pipeline programs as they continue with their efforts to support students of color and students from underrepresented groups in their successful transition along the diversity pathway and into the legal profession. I second what JC says. Everyone should go on to the sites for these 3 programs, and you'll get a lot of impact, a lot of feedback and ideas, and you could probably contact JC, Antoinette, and Cindy if you have specific questions, because they'd be happy to help you. And then Oyango, we have at California Lawyers Foundation, we're starting up the program within that foundation, and then I know we have a lot of really positive feedback from there too, and that's a statewide program that should be really important for our high school students as they begin their post-graduation careers.
Yeah, even though I've stepped down as CEO of the foundation, I'm very supportive of that program. It's doing very, very well, and those are all types of components that people can look to around their states as well, that are not in California. Is California doing things that you can mimic in your state or get something off the ground through your bar association or through law firms or other legal communities?
Okay, great. And I want to thank again our sponsors, the ABA section of Civil Rights and Social Justice and the ABA Young Lawyers Division, for their support. I want to thank all of you in our audience for weighing in and participating in this session. We hope it's been helpful and that you all will continue with your efforts to increase diversity in the applicant pools and to create a level playing field for our diverse students. Be sure to tune in to our next program in this series called Empowering Diversity, Navigating Admissions After SFFA and Harvard, which will be held on December the 5th to address the concerns of prospective undergraduate and law students as they navigate their way into and through the law school system. So at this point, I want to again thank everybody. Everyone take care and have a happy Thanksgiving.